Hello everyone, this is Shankha and welcome to chapter 5 of the Spring tutorial for beginners. So in chapter 4, we learned about inversion of control and dependency injection, and we saw how they can be helpful while developing applications. So in this chapter, we're going to see the various ways in which we can inject dependencies, right? So let's dive straight into some code. And I'll be using the same project that I had used for my previous chapter, right? So we have this IOC demo project that we had created in chapter 4, and we're going to use the same project, and we have the same dependencies inside our POM, and those are the Spring core dependencies, and that's about it. And this is the main class, this is a class that contains the main method that gets generated when we create a project, when we create a Spring starter project, right? And I'm gonna create two classes, and I'm gonna name this class A, right? And I'm gonna name the other class as B, right? And I'm going to try to inject a dependency of A into private B. I'm going to try to inject a dependency of B into A, right? And I would say I would just try to create a constructor for this class, and I would mark this as a component. So we have already seen how these annotations component, how the annotation component works. It basically marks a class as a bean, and Spring it tells Spring that it has to be this class has to be treated as a bean, and Spring needs to create a bean of this class when the application context gets loaded, right? So I'm going to mark this class as component as well. Right, and here I'm going to say auto wired. So auto wired basically tells Spring to inject a dependency into a variable, right? So here we are trying to inject this input parameter which is of type P into this constructor of A, right? And I'm just gonna print inside A, right? And let's try to run this. Sorry, run as Spring Boot app. Okay, so we have our application running, and it prints inside A, right, when this constructor gets called while creating the object of A. So basically what I did here is called constructor injection. So what I'm trying to do is, inside the parameterized constructor of A, I'm trying to inject a bean, an object of B into this variable called B, right? The input parameter for this constructor. So I'm trying to inject the input parameter for this constructor of A, and for that I have written this annotation here @autowired, which would tell Spring to try to inject a dependency of B into this variable, right? Or an object of B into this variable, right? So this is basically called constructor injection. What we could have also done is, instead of having a constructor, I could have created getters and setters. So I would just say generate getters and setters, select all, okay, and I just say auto wired right? And inside the setter I would print inside A, right? And let's run this again. So it runs perfectly fine, right? We have inside A. Now this time what I did is, instead of having a constructor injection, I did a setter injection. So we have this field B and we are not creating an object of it. We are telling Spring to create an object for us and inject the dependency of B into this variable, right? And what we are doing is, inside on top of the setter method, on top of the setter method for set B, we are saying auto wired. So this parameter, this input parameter, which is of type B, is supposed to be injected with an object of B by Spring, and that is what Spring is doing, right? So this is called setter injection. Now let's try one more thing. So instead of this, I just remove this and get the constructor back. So it's a generate constructor using fields, okay? And what I would do is I would create a variable of type A called A inside B, and I would create a constructor using the fields inside class B as well, right? And I would try to auto wire this. I'd save this, and this constructor would also be auto wired. So what I'm basically trying to do is, I have a dependency of class B inside A, class A, and I have a dependency of class A inside class B, and I'm trying to inject it through a constructor injection, right, in both the classes. Now let's try to run this and see what happens. Okay, so this time our application fails and we have a message here saying application failed to start. Description: the dependencies of some of the beans in the application context form a cycle. So what I did basically here is called a circular dependency injection or a cyclic dependency injection. That basically means that when I'm trying to create the object of A, the object of B must be present, and when I'm trying to create the object of B, the object of A must be present. So that is the reason we are getting this exception, or we are getting this error, and our application fails to start, right? Now how do we prevent this? We could have removed this, and we could have got our setters and getters back. And I'll write auto wired on top of this, and let's say print inside A, right? And here I would get rid of this constructor as well, and I would generate the getters and setters using the fields, and on top of the setter I would say auto wired, right? And inside this I will just print inside B, right? Now let's try to run this again and see what happens. Alright, so this time our application doesn't fail, and we have inside B and inside A printed, right? And our application successfully terminates, right? So what we learn from this is constructor injection is an eager initialization. That means at the time when we are trying to create the object of the class, the dependency or the object that we are trying to inject into our class as dependency must be present. So when we were trying to create the object of A, so let's again get rid of this the getters and setters and get a constructor back. Select all. Okay. So when we are trying to do this, so when we are trying to do this, what we are essentially trying to do is, at the time of creation of the object of A, the object of B must be present, and it has to be injected right at the time of the creation of the object of A. So B has to be injected into A right at the time when the object of A gets created. So that is called eager initialization. Eager initialization is basically initializing the member variables or initializing the global variables right at the time when the object of the class is created. So that is exactly what we are trying to do here through constructor injection. But when we did a setter injection, we did not get the exception because we were trying to inject it lazily. So at the time when the object is created, we did not have the global variable or the member variable initialized right at the time when the object is created. So setter injection basically lazily loads the beans, and constructor injection eagerly loads the beans, right? Now if we remove the getters and setters here too and get a constructor back, generate constructor using fields, okay, and this should be @autowired, right? We're again gonna get the exception of circular dependency, right? A and B are circularly dependent on each other. So there's one more way in which we can resolve this apart from having a setter injection. So what we can do is we can mark this as @lazy, right? Get our imports and I'll run this again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to print inside A, and here I'm going to print inside B, right? So let's see if this throws an exception this time or not. So this time it doesn't throw an exception, and we have inside A and inside B printed. So there's a typo here. I should have written INS ID. But we have our application running, right? And it terminates successfully. It doesn't throw an exception or it doesn't throw an error, right? This is because we have marked this as @lazy. So by default, a constructor injection is an eager initialization. That is, at the time of creation of object of this class, of class A, this variable is initialized, or this global member is initialized, this member variable is initialized, right? But when we are doing @lazy, we are telling Spring to lazily load this. We are telling Spring that it need not be initialized at the time of creation of the object of the class. It can be initialized at a later point in time. So that is what exactly Spring is doing. It is just creating the object of this class without injecting the dependency, and then when the dependency is available, it might inject, or when we need the dependency to be injected, it would inject the dependency, right? So that is how we can avoid circular dependency when we have a constructor injection. Now let's remove. So when we run this, we have inside A first printed and then inside B, right? Now let's remove this from here. Do Control X and I would paste it here. Lazy, right? And I would save this class as well. So this time we have A printed first and B then second, right? Let's run this again and see what happens. So this time to our application runs successfully, and there's no exception, there's no error, but we have B printed first and then we have A. What is the reason? Here we haven't marked this constructor as with @lazy annotation, right? So this bean would not be lazily injected, or this variable would not be lazily injected, or this parameter would not be lazily injected. So at the time of creation of the object of A, the object of B must be present, right? Now when we are trying to create the object of B, we are saying that this can be lazily loaded. So at the time of creation of object of B, the object of A need not be present because it can be lazily loaded. It is actually lazily loaded. We are telling Spring to lazily load it with the help of this annotation @lazy, right? So to inject an object of B at the time of creation of object of A, an object of B must be present, right, first. So Spring is creating the object of B first and then it is creating the object of A, because at the time of creation of object of A, B must be present, object of B must be present, and that is why Spring just changes the order in which the beans or the objects are created, right? And apart from this, we have another method of dependency injection, which is not considered as a method of dependency injection by many people, but yeah, there's another way we can inject dependency, that is called field injection. That is directly inject @autowire and then say private a, just directly inject the dependency into a field, right? So yeah, this is another method of injection, which is field injection. So in this video we saw how we can inject a dependency using constructor injection. We saw how we can inject dependency using setter injection. We saw how we can inject dependency using field injection, right? And we saw the advantages and disadvantages of constructor injection and setter injection. So in constructor injection, the beans are eagerly initialized and the dependency injection is eager initialization. And in setter injection, the injection is lazy initialization. And to avoid a circular dependency, we used @lazy annotation, which lazily loads or lazily injects dependencies into components or dependencies into variables, right? So that is all about this chapter, and in the next chapter we're gonna take a look at some of the very important annotations that we have in Spring, and we're gonna see examples of each of them. So stay tuned for chapter 6, and thanks for watching.